One of my favorite parts of Star Wars: The Clone Wars is how much we explore the relationship between Jedi and clones. Whether it's how much the Jedi trust the clones, how intrigued the Jedi are by the clones, or just having to learn how to fight with these random soldiers that just kind of showed up to them on Geonosis, it's a super interesting aspect of the Clone Wars. Now, we never really get truly inside the head of Jedi while watching the Clone Wars, right? We just see the show, we see what they say to him, and we can kind of read their faces, but we never really see inside their heads. But today, I discovered, thanks to some comments on my most recent fan fiction, I discovered some stories, some audiobooks about Star Wars: The Clone Wars that takes episodes of the Clone Wars, 11 of them to be exact, and puts them in audiobook format, giving us an in-depth look at what the characters are thinking. The one I want to go over today is involving Yoda in the first episode of the Clone Wars, Ambush, where he takes on the battalion of droids, and he attempts to bring over the King of Toydaria to the Republic side. It's a really interesting episode, but I really did enjoy the audiobook, as it explored Yoda's inner thoughts about the clones. Now, if you want to read this or listen to this for yourself, you can find all 11 stories of Clone Wars, Stories of the Light and Dark, really anywhere you find audiobooks. I highly recommend it. I'm going to play a little bit of it here, and we're just going to go over what Yoda truly thought, because it gives us an inside look at what likely a lot of wise Jedi thought about the clones. So this first clip I want to play here is really interesting. It just gives a perspective on what Yoda truly thinks about the clones, which I'll play for you right now.
Yoda made a noise down in his throat as he considered that. The clones' instinct to obey disturbed him a little, particularly since they were humans.
Raucous and impatient creatures humans are, and too brief their lives are. And they do just as maturity and wisdom become possible.
But the clone troopers weren't ordinary humans. He'd felt the difference the minute he stepped aboard a gunship back on Kamino at the beginning of the war. If the clones felt like children in the Force, perhaps that was because in some ways, they still were.
Made for war, these children were. Made by the millions. Disposable, their makers consider them.
Yoda is almost disturbed by the clones, but not because he fears them, but more because he feels bad for them and what they've gone through since basically their birth. Since their birth, they've been engineered for one thing: war. And Yoda really understands that, and he grasps that, and he's almost disturbed by it, because these to him, they're children as he sees it. They were bred maybe 10 years ago, and because of their enhanced cloning, their age rate is doubled, or even faster than that, and these clones were bred solely for war. They know nothing else, and they truly are no older than a lot of children across the galaxy, which is strange to Yoda. It really is, but he understands this is what they're here for. They're here to fight. Yoda accepts that, he understands it, but he doesn't like it. It's not something he wants to willingly participate in, but it's something the clones are meant to do. Now, there's one more clip that played at the end that really intrigued me, that I'll play for you right now.
Yoda reached out with his feelings and sensed the minds of the clones surrounding him. Their awareness was similar, but not the same. In music, they might have been variations on a theme, and he knew they would continue to diverge as different experiences shaped the clones. Or at least, the ones who lived. And yet everywhere he sensed the same core desires: to obey orders, to complete missions, to be a good soldier. Once again, he found that disturbing. He'd already heard Republic senators discussing the clones as if they were organic droids, bred to fight and expected to die. And no more to be mourned than a droid sent to the smelter.
Individuals the clones are. Understand that and nurture that we must. Treat them like machines we must not. If we do, lose something far worse than a war we will.
This was another very interesting look at the thoughts of Yoda, and why he thought the clones were important, and why he thought the Jedi had to keep their own humanity or just morality by not treating these clones like droids, but rather like people fighting alongside them like they were, treating them with care. And I think that's really important. I think that's a really good inside look. And it's also interesting to see Yoda talk about what the Senate thinks of the clones, that they're just bred to fight and be killed in war. It's cruel, but it makes sense that that's what the Senate would think. And towards the end, I won't play another clip, but towards the end, Yoda is actually meditating on the ship as the crew takes off, Yoda and the clones. And Yoda meditating bounces from one clone to another, having visions. The first clone, he has a vision of his death, his lifeless eyes looking on ahead as he just dies in war. The second clone, it's very interesting. Yoda has a vision where the clone receives an order, and this clone has just a moment of regret and sorrow, but in an instant, something clicks and he knows it's time to follow orders. Now this is, to me, very clearly like a vision of Order 66, and it goes ignored by Yoda. Yoda decides the future's always in motion, this is not something he wants to do, get involved with looking into the future, it's not the Jedi way, so he ignores these. And the third clone, it's a vision of him standing next to a very dark figure that can't be made out, which we could think is either Palpatine or Anakin, but again, Yoda decides to ignore these visions as it's not the will of the Force in his mind. It's interesting, but that also showed up. And yet that kind of just shows us, that's today's video, what I'm trying to say. That's what I've got to talk about today. Once again, I want to do maybe one of these a week, listen to one of these short stories, and recap what I thought was most important from that in the Star Wars canon lore. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your comments on this. Is this an interesting look inside Yoda's mind to you? I really enjoyed it. So yeah, let me know what you think, and be sure to subscribe as I continue to grow this daily Star Wars community with you all. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.